My name is Scott Wilkinson, and along with Caitlin Blake Hedges, we'll be moderating this webinar. Caitlin and I are the current co-chairs of COMPAS, the organization or the Committee for Students and Postdocs in ASCB. And Caitlin and I are pleased today to have Dr. Sharon Milgram with us to have a discussion about navigating transitions as a trainee. Dr. Milgram is the director of NIH's Office of Intramural Training and Education and is a staunch ally and advocate for trainees at NIH and throughout the country. After completing her postdoc training at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Milgram moved to UNC Chapel Hill, where she ultimately rose to full professor and also served as the associate director for the Medical Science Training Program and director of their interdisciplinary biomedical science graduate program. Dr. Milgram came to NIH in 2007 as the director of OITE, where she directs a trans NIH office dedicated to the career advancement of over 5,000 NIH trainees. Dr. Milgram maintains close ties with various organizations and universities across the country, and we're very excited to have her here today for this discussion about navigating transitions, especially in these trying times. Now, before we get started, I just want to go over a couple logistics. If you have any questions or comments during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom, not the chat feature, and ask your question there. We'll have plenty of time at the end for discussion and questions, but please feel free to submit them throughout the webinar as they come up. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Milgram to begin the webinar.
Great. Thank you, Scott and Caitlin and COMPAS, which I think is a really critically important organization. And I've watched you do some really good things. And I think that especially continuing to do programming during this really complicated time we live in is really an accomplishment for all of you. And I really appreciate the invitation. So for those of you who don't know a lot about the NIH OITE, I want to encourage you to take a look at our website, which is training.nih.gov. We have a careers blog, we have job postings, we have lots and lots of resources for you, a link to our YouTube channel, which is really full of important webinars and resources. And, you know, really we work for you, right? So if there's something that we can do to help you at your school, bring career development programming, you just need to reach out. So make sure to take a look to see what we offer. So I have been doing webinars since maybe the first day of the quarantine here, way back in May. This is Teo, and he will bark. I think that he has racked up more hours on barking in the behind the scenes on webinars than any other dog in this country. He is actually outside right now, so I hope it'll stay quiet, but in general, it's quite possible that it won't. Turns out that for him, the silver lining of the pandemic is that he gets to come to work every day, and he most certainly does that every day. So with that, I'm gonna dive in and talk a little bit about transitions, and I just wanna start by making this observation that all transitions come with a mix of emotions, and it's a mix of positive emotions and negative emotions. So fear can come together with excitement, anxiety, pride, right? I have persisted in science for a long time, and I have a job, and I'm starting this job, and I'm quite proud of it. Some transitions come with confusion. I think the transition back to work from the quarantine for many is coming with confusion, because even though there's webinars and booklets to read and emails with information, it really is quite a confusing time. And so it's sort of like, what am I supposed to do? Do I bring my own mask? Do I have to change mask? Do I have to wear a mask in the lab? Some transitions come with relief, right? We've been working on the paperwork for a good long time, and it got frustrating. We started to think maybe this wasn't going to happen, and suddenly it is going to happen. So it comes with a bunch of relief, trepidation, uncertainty. You know, sometimes we make a transition that we think is going to work out, but we're sort of skeptical. Maybe it isn't. Maybe, we found ourselves really stuck and had to change labs as a graduate student. We found somebody else who said, yeah, I'm going to take you. I look forward to having you. But, how's this all going to work? I'm just moving 2 floors down. It went really poorly with my first lab. So lots of transitions come with skepticism. And there's also the sadness of what we are leaving behind. And sometimes not a whole lot of sadness, but sometimes quite a bit, right? Sometimes we are leaving a place that was incredibly supportive, positive. We got a lot of work done. It really was a place where we grew and thrived, and leaving makes us really sad. And transitions also come with confidence sometimes. We really feel like, I can do this. I worked hard, I'm there, I can do this. A lot of times when I talk to trainees about transitions, what they try to do is push aside all of the negative emotions and sort of really emphasize the positive ones. But I actually think the strategy for successfully navigating transitions is to accept that they come with a mix of positive and negative emotions, and that we can work and deal with both. I also think that we should be really open and acknowledge that any transition right now, whether it be the transition from home back to lab, whether it's a transition for a grad student from rotations into a new lab, or a grad student who defended towards their postdoc, a postdoc into a new postdoc lab, a postdoc into a job, right? All transitions right now are just coming with this extra baggage of the uncertainty and stress of the pandemic, the uncertainty and the stress of the very important discussion happening in our country right now about violence against Black people and other people of color, the uncertainty of an upcoming election that is stressful for many of us to imagine various outcomes. And so I think that we have to add on to normal transition stress, the transition stress of this current climate that we live in. And, I talked in general about some things that I think all of us are experiencing. I also want to acknowledge that for some trainees, this transition comes during a time of great loss. I mean, we all experience some loss during the pandemic, but some individuals experience loss of family members. Family members experience loss of income, which added stress. And so all transitions are hard. Right now, each transition is complicated by the current events and the climate we live in. And for each of us, our own circumstances can add or decrease to that stress. Now, comes with a lot of emotions, and it also comes with a lot of racing thoughts, right? In your head are all these racing thoughts. Is this right? Is it safe for me right now? Will I like it? Will they like me? Will I fit in? Oh, this could be a disaster. I'm really not prepared, right? Even though I've been trying to get this faculty job for a good long time, I'm not really prepared. I don't know about this, right? Or maybe this transition in the postdoc is going to be too big to go from animal models to computational biology, right? Very reasonable racing thought of what a terrible time to start a new position. As I was making this list, I had to chuckle. I put in there, maybe first, I can't even figure out the campus map because I was thinking back to my transition at NIH, where I spent probably an hour and a half one day wandering around Building 10, which is this big, huge building, which has north sides, south sides, old sides, new sides, clinical sides. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so I couldn't figure my way through there. That same day, I mistakenly took the metro in the wrong direction. So I ended up way north of NIH. I needed to get the other way, right? So there's all kinds of things about I'm not going to be able to figure out all the paperwork I need to do, the map, how to get there. Those of you moving, making a transition and moving, right? I have no friends. Right? I'm going to keep in touch with my old friends, but here I am in a new place. Taking the metro or the bus, however I need to get to work, isn't safe. I think that all of us more and more might be asking what happens if I get COVID. I think that the numbers are looking really tough in many, many places right now. And we are seeing a shift of COVID-19 from elderly into younger populations, right? For those of you who live who are in a place living largely alone. Some of you very, very far from family who are international or quite far away nationally, right? A racing thought of I'm alone now in the middle of a pandemic, et cetera, right? And again, I think that if we try to push these thoughts away, they are really problematic. And if we acknowledge that they are a part of the human experience and most certainly a part of the transition experience, then we can find tools and strategies for dealing with them. Because I just talked about thoughts and emotions, right? Our thoughts impact our emotions and behaviors. How we feel affects what we think and do, and what we do affects how we think and feel. So those thoughts and emotions they're really playing off of each other and driving behaviors. And this is a really critical model because this model teaches us where we have control to deal with the stress of a transition. And I'm going to show you those controls right now. So in many ways, there's good news because we have 3 loci of control. If we can control our thoughts and slow them down and make sure that our thoughts are rational about the situation, then we have a chance of impacting our emotions and behavior. Likewise, our emotions, if we can be attuned to what's happening, acknowledge our emotions. You know, the literature, there's a lot of literature out there that says if we acknowledge negative emotions, we actually deal with them better. And that could be summarized to name them, to tame them, right? If we focus for a time on our emotions, they can lead to better behavior, more rational thoughts. This all goes together. In terms of controlling your thoughts, the literature shows that our ability to take a mindful pause and even note our thoughts goes a long way. The reason for that is twofold. First, we need to appreciate that our mind is always telling us catastrophic stories and inaccurate stories. It's a part of our evolutionary threat sensing system. Our archy brain, right, our amygdala, is there constantly scanning for threats. And if we can pause and notice our self-talk and these racing thoughts, we have a chance to slow down, be somewhat compassionate about it. Of course, my thoughts are racing right now. And then something really important that I like to summarize as hats. You hear yourself talk, you acknowledge that you have a choice whether to listen to them or not. You acknowledge that they tend to be more negative than the situation warrants. You talk back, that's the T, and you seek resources, that's the S. So we can control our thoughts by becoming aware of them, being compassionate that these are a part of the transition stress, and trying to rationally talk back to them. Now, we can also control, in some ways, our emotions. Not really control them, but acknowledge them and work with them. That's probably what I should say there. Again, that mindful pause. We have to be able to stop and say, I am really feeling scared. I am really feeling a lack of confidence right now. I am really feeling sad about leaving. We have to name all of our emotions to begin to deal with them. So if we can pause and name them, again, we can use those tools of self-compassion. By self-compassion, what the science means is that we acknowledge that life is actually hard for us and for everyone. That we make mistakes and so does everyone else. That things won't go well and that's to be expected. And there's great literature and a set of scientific research behind the idea of self-compassion that's been done by a scientist named Kristen Neff. Scientists hate the word compassion. It's like, oh, we're supposed to be hard on ourselves and push ourselves. But the science shows that if we can accept that we are struggling, if we can accept that things are hard, it opens us up to seeking the resources we need. So that's how we can work with our emotions. Now, our behaviors actually drive our thoughts and emotions, and we know a lot about that. right? We know that exercise causes the release of endorphins, which make people feel good. I certainly know whenever I am stressed that an hour on the tennis court, an hour on my bike, a chance to really focus, go out walking, running, whatever, makes a big difference. So our behaviors can help with our negative thoughts and negative emotions through wellness, right? So that's one where we can be proactive. If we take care of ourselves, we will be able to deal with our thoughts and emotions more effectively. But also the other way, if our thoughts and emotions are in check and we're calm and focused, we can do prep work to manage the things that might actually get in the way. Or we can pause and say, oh, I have to reevaluate what I decided. I'm going to have to do this a little bit different. So you actually have 3 really great ways to control transition stress. By beginning to gain awareness of your thoughts, particularly your negative thoughts, by paying attention to emotions, acknowledging them, and giving them a space, and by changing behaviors that help you improve your thoughts and emotions. So that's a really key slide. And now what I want to do is maybe go a little bit deeper than a big general model. And I'll start by going back to what I really alluded to earlier. I mean, this is just an unprecedented time of struggle for everyone. We are all under a tremendous amount of stress, some shared stress, some unique stress to our circumstances. And that stress is career stress, pandemic stress, racial injustice stress, economic stress, career uncertainty stress, family stress for those of you who have had to be full-time caretakers. It can be caretaker stress for elderly folks that you're taking care of or care about. So all kinds of stresses. I also think we need to start to pay attention to the fact that this has now been going on for a very, very long time, and we are all likely changed by the experience, both personally and professionally. I did a town hall for trainees for folks at NIH, and somebody submitted a question that said, you know, what really scares me is over these last few months, I realized that I want to change my approach to work, and I want to have better balance and spend more time with my family. And I want to be a good scientist, but also have a better life. And I'm afraid when I have to tell my PI that, right? So when we change, it can cause disruptions around us. It can feel good, but also unsettling at the very same time. So we may be struggling with these changes, really appreciating them and feeling good about them, but also worrying about them. Is this for real? How's this going to impact me in the long term? And so I think it's worth it for all of us to think a little bit about that. Because again, just like emotions, the more aware we are of of how we feel about things, the better off we are. The one other thing to think about is that many of us are now comfortable staying home. We're used to it. Even if it's not all that comfortable and we wish we were somewhere else, it has become our new normal, and our brain has really adjusted to this. All transitions mean building new mental models, right? How is this going to be? How's it going to work? How am I going to handle things? But this particular transition time means that we are building new mental models with really incomplete, unpredictable, and ever-changing data. You open the news one day and you might feel optimistic. You open it the next day, you might not feel so optimistic, right? Things just seem to be really in flux right now. So we have to factor in that everything about this transition is impacted by the last several months, and is likely to be impacted even further as time goes on. I think the most important thing that I learned since March, it isn't actually about transitions. It was a part of a wellness webinar that we put together about dealing with COVID stress, but I've started to put it into every webinar that I give because I think it's the most powerful thing I've learned in a long time. And that is that really, there are lots of things in life we can't control, and we don't really even care to control them, right? They're not so impactful on us, whatever, right? There are some things we can't control, though, that we wish to control, and that is where we get really stressed. because we can't control it, but we really want to. You know, and in this regard, if you're a student waiting to start your get back to lab and you want to finish up, and meanwhile you've lost a bunch of months, you might wish to control the exact timeline that you can return, but you really can't. You might wish, if you're a postdoc, to control the academic job markets, or whether industry is hiring, or what's happening with AAAS fellowships, but you don't have control. So you might wish to control it, but you don't. What we have is this third bin of things we can control. And the more we can learn the difference between these three, and the more we can spend our limited energy, our limited focus, our limited time on things within our sphere of control, the better we are at managing our stress. And I think this is a fundamental tool for people to keep in mind. So you want to focus on things in the green circle. And so I thought of 5 things that you can control at this point. One is you can work hard to understand institutional rules about when you will return, under what restrictions, what the timing will be, about policies and procedures to keep you safe, about who to talk to if you're uncomfortable returning or you have issues once you return to campus, right? So you have a lot of control over reading all of those emails, watching all of those videos, putting out there your questions. You also have control about your plans, about your work. So thinking realistically about it and what you can accomplish under these really unusual circumstances. And I have a lot more to say about that in later slides. You can control making plans and attending to details that decrease your stress and help you feel safe, right? I think that you have a lot of control over that. Not total control, because there are people around you, and if they're not wearing a mask and you are, right, that decreases your feeling of safety. But you certainly can make plans about your commute, the timing of it, about how you're going to engage with people around safety, right? You can also control preparation for important conversations at home and with work colleagues about best practices for staying safe, about being as productive as possible. How are we all going to work on this? And I've noticed, as I've mentored trainees at NIH, that labs where there's open communication, both between the trainees and the PI, and also among the entire group, open communication about all of this decreases stress. Right? And when everybody is sort of elbows out, I'm taking care of myself, it's hard to feel really good about this transition. And so you have some control over encouraging a positive way forward. And finally, your 5th area of control, and I stressed this earlier, is how you take care of yourself and manage your stress. And so I want to talk about each of these points for a little bit. And I want to do it by first saying the more realistic and thoughtful you are, the more likely it will be that you will have some success. I want to note that I said some success. I think it is unreasonable to assume that these transitions will go without bump. Okay, there will be bumps and setbacks. First of all, even under great conditions, there are bumps and setbacks. Every transition has bumps and setbacks, but right now is really a fragile time. And so it is likely that there will be some success, but also some real frustration. And then again, and you're going to get tired of me saying it, but the more you take care of yourself and the more you focus on managing your stress, the more likely it will be that you will have some success during this transition period. These 2 first principles are accurate no matter the transition. They are true for all transitions, but especially true now. And I really want to stress that you are all, or we are all, going back to a new normal. The new normal is really currently under development. Every day, the new normal changes. So we have to expect discomfort. The human brain is hardwired to look for patterns. We are comfortable when we follow patterns, right? And for some, our first first step of the way, right? I start every day at the gym. Well, that's been disrupted, right? I can't do that now. I used to commute by metro. Well, I'm not going to do that now. So for many of us, every part of our normal is having to change. And so I think you really have to be kind to yourself. And if that idea of self-compassion really rubbed you the wrong way, I really encourage you to go to Kristen Neff's webpage and to ask yourself why, because the honest truth is that this is a really hard time and you should be able to pause and appreciate that for yourself. In thinking realistically about work, I put out 4 questions that I think are helpful for grad students and postdocs to think about. The first is, what are the most important experiments right now? And I encourage you to think about low-hanging fruit, some successes that you could get fairly quickly, maybe also something that allows you, while you're working at home, to write up experiments or something, right? I get a little bit of preliminary data. It allows me to plan some other things. I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind. I don't think now is the time to set up a complex, really, multiple days, weeks, time points, all kind of experiment. If you have to, you have to, but it would be much better to think low-hanging fruit right now. Another thing to think about is critical foundations. For those of you at really critical points, I'm going to write a grant in a year and this piece of data would matter a lot. Or I'm really getting ready for a committee meeting and being able to tell them the technique actually worked would help. Those I call as critical foundation experiments. Maybe you're sitting with the reviews and you're missing one thing for a publication. That should be prioritized. If you have virtual meetings coming up and there's something you might like to have, right, that would make you feel better about the presentation, that's a critical thing to think about right now. And or application needs. If you're entering the job market and you just want to be able to say the platform is working. I want to stress that everyone is going through this slowdown. Sometimes some trainees have emailed me and said, at this school, postdocs are working more than we are, and that really stresses me out. And I know it's easy to compare things like that, but the honest truth is it is slow everywhere. And every admissions committee and every funding agency and every journal editor is aware of that. And while I think it still sometimes takes some back and forth to explain your current situation, I think it's important to remember that while it would be great to get some experiments done for this application or publication or committee meeting, that you also likely to be okay without it, especially if you say, I made a real effort to do this. So your first thing is you want to ask yourself, what are the important experiments? And then you want to say, okay, now I got to rein that in. And I'm going to rein that in by asking what I can accomplish given the timing and schedule I have to work with. And maybe you can go back to your PI and renegotiate your amount of time and schedule, but maybe not. And maybe it will become out of your control because the data in some states is getting worse. We haven't hit the influenza season yet, right? So we all have to prepare for hearing that external circumstances that we don't have a lot of control over are going to compress our time. So you want to really sit and say, this is a time where I need to not be overly ambitious and set myself up for failure. And then I think after you do those 2 steps, you want to think about communication of those priorities. And that could be your PI, that could be colleagues, that could be collaborators. Hold on one sec, I'm sorry. The NIH just popped something up there. If you are moving into a job where you are supervising people or you currently have students that you supervise, you'll want to be as clear and transparent as you can be with them, so they know what the priorities are. So all of you are working together, right? This is a time to really use your emotional intelligence to communicate with everyone in your immediate circle of influence around science. And I think that that's hard always, but especially hard when people are under stress. So appreciate that it's really possible that you will see the situation differently than they do. And I think also I should acknowledge that some of you work with really supportive PIs, and these conversations will be very, very easy. And some of you have more challenges, and it will be a lot harder, okay? And then these were 3 that I think apply to everybody. If you are starting a new position, I think you have a 4th thing to consider, and that is how can you learn new approaches and build rapport with your new colleagues under current conditions. I've been thinking about this a lot because I just made some offers and hired new people in the OITE to add to our career and wellness team. And I've had some really hard conversations with them about, so how, you know, there's like 35 people. How do you want to meet everybody? And each of them was different. It's interesting. They all had different suggestions of what would work for them, but all of them appreciated that I called and said, so this is an unusual way to start. Let's talk about it. All right. So if you're starting a new position, you really want to give some thought. If your colleagues have reached out to you and said, we want to welcome you and figure this out, that's great. But if not, you might want to initiate that conversation and say, hey, I'm starting and I'd like to integrate the best way possible. Can we talk about strategies? Right? Are there journal clubs I should join, meetings I should be aware of? Are there ways that I can learn some things, read some things? You would do all of this at the start of any new position, but I think you need to be much more intentional about it right now. Now, you also need to think realistically about life. I want you to focus on yourself and focus on your inner circle. By that, I mean immediate family and friend support circle. Okay, for some, our inner circle is all friends. For some, it's a mix of friends and family. It just depends on your current life situation. In terms of focusing on yourself, as you face transitions at work, you want to make sure that you still have time to be the parent, sibling, partner, adult, child, friend that you wish to be. But you also want to be realistic about what you can give. You know, so I found myself at first the pandemic started and I'm like, well, I'm going to be home and I'm not commuting. That saves me a lot of time. So I'm going to be cooking dinner every night. I love to cook. Oops, sorry about that. I love to cook. My wife prefers that I do the cooking. And I also think in some ways, maybe the fact that I've cooked for so many years now makes it even more intimidating. But I've reached a point where I sort of ran out of juice and some days go very, very late. And I've been really clear and say, do you think you could cook tonight? Right? I had this expectation of these beautiful meals every night, and it was completely unrealistic. And that's going to be the same for you, whether that's in what you have been doing in terms of helping people, in terms of childcare, in terms of cooking, in terms of cleaning your house, in terms of shopping, figuring out the grocery orders. You're going to need to give more time and energy to work. And that means you only have a certain amount total. A little bit less can go to yourself and to your inner circle. And so it's really important to think about this for both yourself and your inner circle. We need support right now. We want to be available to give support right now, but we need to be really clear about our boundaries of what we can and cannot do. I think in regards to dealing with all of the issues going on, I like to think of these 3 really foundational questions or groundwater questions, right? The groundwater is underneath the soil. It determines everything about the quality of the earth, right? The quality of our streams and lakes is because of the groundwater. It's like this underneath everything. What do I need to be thinking about? So the first is, as you're working through this, if you are expecting a lot from yourself, ask yourself, would I expect that from a friend? If you are being really hard on yourself about the transition and about how little you got done the first 2 weeks, which isn't really so little, but it feels to you so little compared to your early expectations, right, before this, ask yourself, would I say this to a friend? I think that's one of the really big groundwater questions. If you would not say it to a friend, then you really shouldn't be saying it to yourself, and you really, really need to rethink things. Now, I want to acknowledge that some PIs do say business as usual, which is sort of ludicrous, and I hope by now most of them have stopped saying that. I heard a lot of that at the beginning of the pandemic. People will get a lot of work done. And I actually have had some people tell me, I've sat at home and wrote it, and it's really fabulous. I'm like, yes, but you're not a trainee. Your life situation is really different. So I acknowledge that some PIs might be difficult. And so if your PI says things to you that feel unreasonable, I think the same thing applies. If you wouldn't say what they said to you to someone else, then I think you have to take what they said and appreciate that it's not full on accurate. If they're giving you a terribly hard time about getting work done, you need to ask yourself, if I was the PI, would I be saying this? And if the answer is no, then you need to say, this is an important person and I understand hierarchy, but I also have to have some boundaries. I'm going to talk a little bit, I'll give you some resources around assertiveness at the end. The second groundwater question is, how can I best address conflicts that will likely arise given the stress that everyone is feeling? If we're all trying to get in cell culture at the same time, I don't want to undo our ability to work together effectively, so I want to be calm as I move forward to address this. And the third comes right back to that idea of taking care of yourself. How do I proactively support myself and my communities right now, so that we have some real plans in place? As you make plans, I want you to focus not on finding control so much, but finding micro controls, appreciating that in the big picture, we don't have that much control, but you have lots of micro controls. So for example, in your daily routine, you can decrease a lot of stress by thinking through, how am I going to get there? What am I going to do while I'm there to be safe? And what am I going to do when I get home, right? I'm going to have these routines. You can also think about simplicities at home in terms of daily routine. On Sunday, I'm going to get in the kitchen and prep some things, and I'm not going to have to think when I get home exhausted. I get to work really long days, but only, Tuesday and Thursday. I'm going to come home. If I'm hungry, I'll get hangry, and that'll be a disaster. So think through simplicities at home. Also, look at your daily routines and schedule in your breaks and wellness, or else you will get busy and say, oh, this will end soon, I'll be okay, and you will crash and burn. You also want to find control in reprioritizing and adjusting timelines. I've talked about this already, but I wanted to put it all together and to remind you that you have some control here. Rather than setting up a schedule for the perfect day, you could set up a schedule for the average day. And if you end up with an hour at the end of the day, woohoo, you can celebrate and use it for something productive. You want to think through navigating challenges with coworkers. So you might want to creatively, on your first days back, look at the limited space, look at the setup and think, how can I make this really work? Right? You might have some micro control there, and suddenly being in the space feels much better. And I just want to remind you again about the need to advocate for yourself, be as flexible as possible. And then you want to find micro controls in preparing for communications about people who cross boundaries, right? So you're waiting in line for food and people get too close, right? How are you calmly going to say, it would be great if you step back? Or are you just going to not even worry about that and just step back yourself? At the beginning of this, I felt so like I wanted to be righteous about everybody following the rules. And now I realize that just stresses me out. So I bring a book and I step as far away as I can. But if somebody got too close and I felt unsafe, I want to have a go-to, excuse me, but I'm not comfortable with how close you are. So you can have micro controls by planning all of these things out. I've already alluded to the fact that it's likely that you won't see things the same way as your PI, the same way as other colleagues, the same way as people in your house. The amount of negotiation my wife and I had about how to have friends over for Sunday night dinner shows just, illustrated to me just how much we all see this differently, and how valuable it is to take a deep breath and listen and then find ways forward. Different opinions are to be expected, and you're going to want to ask yourself, how can I work through this calmly? If it's someone where you have a history, you know, you should ask yourself what's happened in the past when we've disagreed and how have we worked it out. You also need to ask yourself how important is the issue. Like my example of, I just stepped back now in line at the farmer's market, but it was important to me to have friends over for dinner. And so I said, I really want to have this discussion. Can we figure out a way? And, you know, it was amazing how we worked it all out. Same thing actually with people in my office. We've had lots of things where we've needed to say, you know, this is really important and we're going to have a hard conversation and figure it out. But if you do it from a place of calm and they do it from a place of calm, then things are much better. I think you need to appreciate that these kinds of negotiations with people who don't see things the way you do, those conversations will always be more stressful if the stakes are high and if the disagreement is with your PI or others in authority. And that's a whole issue about whether you work for a PI who's really supportive or absent or unsupportive, right? Whether you work for a mentor or a tour mentor. And I'll give you some resources for that. We won't have time to talk about that today. So you want to think through your wants and your needs, be clear about your priorities, appreciate that you don't have control over a lot of things and you can't change other people. So your goal is to get your needs met, not to change them or win the debate. And you want to really talk through things and practice critical conversations if it really matters. If safety is an issue, you should seek institutional support as soon as possible. In terms of being assertive, there's this workshop on our YouTube channel. And in terms of managing up or managing your PI, there's this one. This is pretty long. There was a lot of questions. And the parts about difficult PIs come towards the end. So I just want to end and say there's no magic bullet for making transitions. I wish there was. To do well, you have to be well, which means you really need to take care of yourself. And then I wanted to give you some resources for that. These are 2 recent webinars. They were done for the summer internship program. So although I give some examples that really will resonate for a postdoc, some of them you'll chuckle a little bit. It's like I haven't been in the classroom for a long time. But the strength of this is the resilience is together with wellness. So you only need to watch one. And this one on understanding cognitive distortions and imposter fears, I think right now cognitive distortions are getting in a lot of people's way. So I would recommend those. Go ahead and watch. And I just want to leave you with something I've been just reading about and learning about. So everybody talks about SMART goals, and I struggle with SMART goals because I'm just not, I don't think about things in quite such tangible ways and quantitative ways. So I was looking for other goal setting strategies and I found WOOP, which I think is great. Wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. For me, this really works. So WOOP asks you to connect your wish, right? And really you could skip the outcome. The outcome is one positive thing if you achieve that goal, right? So I get back to lab and do well. The outcome is I may have a piece of data I really want, but you connect it with an inner obstacle, all the inner obstacles that exist, right? Or any obstacle, inner or outer. Then you make an if then plan. So an XY, if X happens, I will do Y, right? If I am really stressed about the commute, I will consider asking about taking the car. If I don't have enough time in cell culture, I will email everyone and ask if we can reevaluate. If I'm catastrophizing so much that I get stressed and can't sleep, I will go talk with a supporter, mentor, therapist, etc., to talk about it. So if then, it comes out of the work of Gabriel Ottigan, and I think it's a really cool model. So I just want to remind you that everyone is having to make really hard decisions. Everyone is struggling, and it is unlikely that anyone is picking up exactly where they left off. Resilience is people plus process. You cannot isolate yourself during this time. So with that, I will take questions. We still have plenty of time. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Sharon. That was great. And like she said, we'll take questions now if anyone has any for Sharon. You can use the Q&A option down at the bottom of your screen. and Scott and I can help go through those questions for Sharon if we get too many. And I also just wanted to give a quick mention that we have a survey for this webinar we just hosted. So if you could fill that out after watching this, that'd be great. I'll send it in the chat real quick. We can start with questions. Does anyone want to enter one in the Q&A? Don't have any yet. I guess we can start with a question. So I know you talked a little bit in the beginning about how this quarantine has led us to a new normal, and a lot of things will be changed after everything is back to normal. What do you think are some good positive skills that people can take away going into the future when hopefully everything is better?
Yeah, well, I think for sure many of us have come to appreciate that taking care of ourselves and the people we really care about should be higher on our list. And I hope that we don't all lose that when we get busy again and we forget about all of this. Because I really do think some of the dysfunction in research environments is due in part to the fact that we don't take care of ourselves. And the data on mental health in the biomedical research and healthcare community is not great, right? I mean, we should look at those data and be concerned. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing we will all appreciate is that the scientific community is smaller, can feel smaller than it is, right? These poster sessions virtually have worked. Symposia virtually have worked. And I wonder if we will be more likely to sign on and participate in things like that, which for some people, if you have young children, if you're a caregiver, if money is tight, if the meeting is very far away, I think that this might expand everyone's options without having to get on a plane. I also think that maybe we've learned in watching the horrific health disparities of the pandemic. I hope that as researchers, we've learned that we have a moral responsibility to address health disparities. I hope that we've learned, that racism has no place in science, that we all have to stop and learn more about how we see others. So I think that there's a chance of a lot of positive things coming out of this. And I really hope so. It's a great question. Thank you.
I was muted. Looks like we still don't have any questions. Anyone brave enough to ask one?
I can't see. Usually in these webinars I've been doing, I get lots of questions. I think it's like this great safety that I don't have to stand up at a mic. I promise that I will be, I won't bite.
I know. I was like, I guess I didn't mention they're anonymous. So if that is your concern, you can still ask a question. Okay. Here we go. Can you see it, Sharon, or do you need me to read it?
I cannot see it, actually.
Okay.
I don't know. Oh, here it is. I see Q&A. Okay. Yeah. I'm a grad student about to transition into a new postdoc. What are some suggestions you have for building connections with new lab mates, new department, while still working from home? Thank you. It's a great question. I think that the first thing is to reach out to folks in your new lab and invite all of them to join you for a virtual tea. My hope is that your group does that for you. And I just had a call with PIs here at NIH and where I really stressed that. I said, this is a time where it's going to feel really alienating to start. And so hopefully that will happen on your behalf. And if it does, then go really prepared to be able to talk to each person, know a little bit about them, know about if they've published something recently, have some questions all set up. I suggest that you ask your PI. You can come up with a first list. Here are some things I think I should be reading, and here are some things I might be able to learn online about new techniques and such. Do you have thoughts? Do you want to add anything to this? I think that would help. I would find out if there's a postdoc association, either in your department or at that university, and I would start going to whatever they are offering. put into the chat box, hey, I'm new, I just arrived, right? And hopefully somebody will reach out and talk with you a little bit, and you'll start to build a circle and connections there. I would go to virtual seminars, and hopefully if there's a time afterward to mingle. Some places now I know are trying to add that in as we realize how isolating this is. Show up at some of those events. I think those are some important things to do in your new environment. I think that you should hold on and sort of solidify the support circle that you have around you outside of that environment, because it will be harder to really hit the ground running. So you want to be able to go back to your old support. Do you have recommendations for technical training or learning that may make us competitive applicants for those of us trying to transition from academia to industry? I do. We have an industry advisor, and there are some nice webinars about industry. One thing that industry looks for much more than academic positions do, and it chaps me that that's the case, academia should be looking for this as well, is leadership training and management training. And there are some great trainings online. You know, Coursera has, I mean, some of them are free, some there's a small charge. Coursera has a lot of management and leadership coursework out there. Your university might offer some. I also am noticing a lot of our students are taking some trainings in computational biology and in coding, because big data is sort of a part of everything, becoming more and more so. That can make you very competitive. Even though industry will have a ton of resources and support, your ability to talk with the computational folks will be improved by a little bit of training. The third thing is the more competent you are in talking about your science to non-scientists, the better you will do in industry. So any presentation courses, any chances to talk about your science in a less technical way, that would be a really useful thing right now. Any suggestions for dealing with a PI or coworker that has difficulty understanding challenging circumstances? Yeah, perhaps they don't have the same experiences as you or others and struggle to see alternatives perspectives. It's a really, it's been an issue for trainees and staff, honestly, from day one of all of this, and actually way before this. I think that a part of the strategy there is to, you know, I said hats, hear your inner voice, but here you're hearing what somebody else has to say. The A is appreciate you have a choice. And I think, you know, it's important to distinguish what is just someone's opinion that you don't have to let land and hurt versus what's an instruction from someone. So if someone says, well, you should be able to do that, you know, the answer is, you know, you don't know my life. And sometimes I think you just have to disengage. It's almost like you go to that meeting and you have a raincoat and an umbrella and your big, you know, rain boots, because you can't let every irrational opinion that they have land on you. Now, I appreciate that when it's your PI, it's easy to catastrophize and say, if I don't do exactly what they say, you know, this could really lead to issues down the road. You need to pause and ask yourself, how true is that? Because often as people calm down, they realize, well, it will be an uncomfortable 45 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, but it's not going to have this huge impact on me. And I know that really depends on how difficult your PI is or how difficult that coworker is. Sometimes we just have to decide to disengage. Sometimes we have to decide to engage. And then there's a great book, Your Perfect Right. I talk about it in that assertiveness workshop. Sometimes we have to seek help and then engage. So we have to talk to institutional leaders and then engage. So it really depends. Do you have any suggestion for transitioning to a different research field during a postdoc? How to get better prepared and how to pitch during communication with potential PIs. So I think one way to get better prepared is if you're entering a new field, to learn a little bit about that field, right? If you're you were doing flies and you really want to work on mouse models, find a course on transgenics or read right? If you can't find a course, although I bet you can find some kind of trainings. So you use some of this downtime to start learning for the future. And that is, in terms of that, what can you control? There's something you can control. The way to pitch it is to appreciate that all of your research skills are transferable, and you don't really have to convince someone. You just have to articulate how you see this fitting into your long-term vision. You should appreciate that that's a pretty common thing, and that many PIs are excited to have somebody coming in from a new field because you ask questions differently than someone in the field for a long time. You tend to raise your hand and ask these foundational questions that we don't think about anymore. And then we realize, wait a minute, we have a blind spot. And so I think that if you can talk about what you did before in your previous field and talk with enthusiasm about why you're transitioning, that you're going to get a lot of enthusiasm. I wanted to ask for your input on communications during the work from home. There are days I feel it's impossible to have effective communications with my peers and mentors and even close friends, and Zoom fatigue doesn't help. Would you mind offering some advice? Yeah, I actually have to say I have struggled with the same thing. And I have started, after talking about it with someone whose opinion I respect, I've started setting a timer and getting up and going outside. We have a beautiful yard, and it's sort of shocking how little time I've spent out there during the day. And I really need to get away. In terms of communication with people in large groups, like in the OITE, I've started occasionally saying, we're just going to do a round robin of breakout groups. So we're just chatting for a little bit because, in most meetings in person, it's a combination of some chit chat and personal and business. But you get on Zoom and it's like, okay, agenda item 1. And so I think if there are larger groups, you might advocate for some breakout rooms where people chat. And I have tried one other thing in terms of Zoom fatigue, and that is actually taking Zoom holidays. So a Zoom holiday could be just 3 hours, right? I'll just say all morning I'm not going to get onto Zoom. And for the most part, people have respected that, where they say, hey, are you available? And I say I am, but not till the afternoon. I think it's really important. Check the ergonomics of your workstation. Make sure that you're not having to squint to get close. Make sure that you're not slouching to work. Take a look at that. I am considering a postdoc in a new country, in a huge city, and I'm a bit afraid of spending years in a place I have not had the possibility of visiting. How can I reduce the stress this transition brings? That is a really, really valid thing to be stressed about. One way to reduce the stress is to talk to lots of people who live there. And you can ask to talk to current postdocs in LA, at that university and in other areas of LA. You want to ask a lot of personal questions about commutes, about where they live, about what they like about LA, about what it costs. I often think about our visiting fellows and how heroic it is that they fly, across multiple time zones, land in Washington, D.C. or at one of the other NIH campuses, having never, ever visited, and yet they somehow manage to make a life and figure things out. And I guess what I would say is that models, right, data tell us that many people do it very, very successfully. LA is a huge city, and so you really need to think about, what do I like about living in a big city? I love living in a big city, but I don't want to be on the road all day. Well, then you have to be able to live really close. And I think if you set up a set of questions to ask people, as you do your first one, it'll lead you to a couple more questions. I also think before you set up all of those informational interviews, that you should journal a little bit about what your perfect work and life looks like. And if it's, I live right next to campus, I bike, everything is right there, I'd never need a car, right? You might need to think, is LA right? On the other hand, if you say, I love adventures and I can be flexible in terms of how I commute, I just want to be able to get there, within 30 minutes. I want to be close to this or that. You know, you might find, wait a minute, the idea of an adventure really drives me. Some of us love adventure, some of us love much less adventure, and there's no right or wrong, it just is. And so you should journal about what makes you happy first, and then you should talk to people. My son lives in LA. I can tell you that he swears it's the best place to live. Although right now he's sort of homesick and struggling a bit with the pandemic, but he says LA is beautiful. And it sure seems that every time he's at the beach, we've been jealous. Other questions?
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any more questions left, and I guess it's about 3 o'clock, so.
Perfect. All right, so I wish you all the best. Stay safe and well.
Yes, thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you everyone that attended. And like I said, I posted a survey if you want to let us know the feedback from this webinar that we held. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. And
Great.
Sharon, you did a great job.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.